Hey guys, and welcome back to KetoCon. My name is Jimmy Moore. I'm the host of the Livin' La Vida Low Carb Show, and Keto Talk, and Fasting Talk, and used to be Low Carb Conversations, and used to be Ask the Low Carb Experts. Yes, I like to podcast, and so do these guys. So we're really happy to have everybody on the panel. Let's go down the line. You've heard from several of them already, but let's do it again. Let's be all formal and everything. Brian, tell us who you are and what your podcast is.
I'm Kerry Brown.
That's the ugliest Kerry Brown I've ever seen.
I'm Brian Williamson. I've got the KetoVangelist podcast. I've got the KetoVangelist Kitchen podcast with the ineffable Kerry Brown. And I've got the Ketogenic Athlete podcast with the beast gentleman, Danny Vega.
And I'm Kerry Brown, and I do the KetoVangelist Kitchen podcast with Brian.
My name's Danny Vega. Brian sent me a microphone in the mail one day, and I plugged it in, and all of a sudden we just started making cool podcasts together. Can you say the word chocolate for me, please, just one time?
Chocolate.
Amazing.
Every time, right? My name is Leanne Vogel, and I have the Keto Diet podcast, which I started about a year and a bit ago. Yeah.
My name is Allie Miller, and I have the Naturally Nourished podcast, and it's going on its 50th episode on Monday.
Whew.
So Allie, let's start back on your end. When did you start your podcast?
So I started my podcast about a year and a half ago as well, but somewhere in the mix, I delivered a baby, and that kind of slowed things down. So we took about a 3-month hiatus, but yeah, I think about a year and a half ago.
I started podcasting about 2 years ago, and then I shifted gears into primarily focusing on keto. So I think we're celebrating our 1-year anniversary October 2nd. I think that's about accurate.
I think it was. I remember the announcement. I remember listening to that. That was cool. Like a year. It was. I can't believe it's been a year. All right. So my name's Danny Vega, and back to what Jimmy said earlier. I didn't know that I wanted to do podcasts at all. I just told Brian I wanted to talk about stuff with athletes and how keto is good for athletes, and Brian gave me the platform. I just did an interview with someone from Denmark doing a podcast who's stuttering and who's getting through it, but you know what? It doesn't matter because he's trying to spread that message in Denmark, and I think that's really cool. So I didn't set out to be a podcaster, but that's just how it happened.
So that wasn't the question at all, but the question was, what year did you start?
Oh, I thought you said what got you into podcasting.
How long ago?
Terrible listening comprehension.
I'm getting to the what got you into it.
So the KetoVangelist Kitchen podcast started out as a little add-on.
Little is not
Well, it was intended to be a little add-on, a segment at the end of the KetoVangelist where Brian interviews really cool people, and we were going to do a little 20-minute segment tagged on the end, but I think we managed to do 20 minutes once, and then they were like 40 minutes, 60 minutes, hour, 20 minutes. And but people loved them, which was cool, and they said make it its own thing. So we started doing the add-ons last September, and then we did the full KetoVangelist its own thing January 1st this year.
So I gotta be honest with you, like this week has been a blur, so I'm not even sure what day it is now. But I started KetoVangelist probably two and a half years ago. I took a 3-month break because, and I've told this story before, but I started with zero audience. I started a blog and I had 0 readers, not even my wife. She still doesn't read it. And then I started a podcast because people can't read a blog when they're doing dishes and they're in the gym and we're driving and stuff. So I was like, okay, I got to get the message out audio. So I started a podcast, and then I stopped because I was convinced no one was listening. And so this was 2.5 years ago, and I took a break for 3 months because I didn't think anyone was paying attention or cared. And I got an email from a guy saying, when are you going to get new episodes? I need this new episode. So I was like, all right, that's the one guy. So Don, thanks, I'll keep doing it for you. Right. So that was about 2.5 years ago, January for Kerry, and it was probably, we were doing August, September timeframe of last year was when we started doing the athlete podcast. That was a long answer.
So the reason I asked that question is, did you notice since 2014, brand new. So it means there's plenty of opportunity for you guys if you have a voice and you have an interest in sharing, like we were talking about in the last panel, sharing your story and getting the message out. I tell people I can't interview everybody that wants to be on my show. I have a waiting list right now on the Living La Vida Low Carb show of over 500 people that want to be interviewed. You know how long it takes to get through 500 people on my show. I do 3 a week already, and I'm not doing no more. So it takes a while, and so it's good that we have podcasters. Now, of course, I've been at this since 2006. Again, Fred Flintstone was the only one podcasting at the time, and I think he had a little tin cup with a string on it. So
I heard that episode.
I know, right? It was a horrible episode, but so I mean, you get good at it the more you do it, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about, because again, it's such a new medium for a lot of people, even though it's not new, and speaking obviously is not new. But what got you the confidence, Allie, to want to start a podcast? What I always tell people, what inhabited your brain to say, oh, this is a good thing?
So I am a medical practitioner first and foremost, and was spending most of my days actively in clinic face-to-face with clients from 8 a.m. until 5:30, give or take, and then charting and documenting, and then fielding emails starting at 11 p.m. and onward. And every time I would lecture, I would create a little buzz where everyone would say, oh my gosh, I didn't make these connections, or I hadn't heard these things. How can we get your voice out there? And so it just seemed very organic. I've been doing TV segments for about 5 years. So TV segments, very different in the sense that they're on the news 3 to 5 minutes in length at best. There's still the unpredictability factor and the live element of it, but you just aren't able to cram in as much information and polysyllabic phrases that I like to put into space as you can in your own avenue. And so I reached out actually to Jimmy, and I don't even know, on Instagram, or I don't know, and said, like, how do I do this, man? And he awesomely, we talked over Skype and showed me this is what a microphone is. We kind of talked through it, but I think that the kind of demand came from audience and people that had heard me lecture saying, we need to hear your voice more. And to me, it was much less stress than writing a blog. I didn't have to think through it. I didn't have to do multiple reads and edits. I just kind of got to open my mouth and let it out.
So I started my YouTube channel in 2014, and although I really loved it, every time I recorded a video, I had to do my hair, put makeup on, and find a new shirt. And I always wore tights or pajamas on the bottom, and if you guys watch my YouTube channel, oftentimes I show you which tights I'm wearing, but it just got to be a lot. And YouTube videos, you can't make them really, 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 really long. And there were a lot of things that I wanted to cover, but more so with guests or just topics. And the first podcast was more answering questions, and I found there was such a need. And the reason I started the Keto Diet podcast was because I wanted it to be different than the podcasts out there that was primarily practical information and like how to do stuff. And I wanted to talk about the struggles specifically for women, our hormones, our fear of certain foods, our dieting mentality, and the struggles that we have when our brain starts to light up with fat, the emotions that we have to deal with after that, and the aftermath of feeling more turned on with our health and our bodies, and learning how to structure our lives through that. So I wanted to start that conversation, not so much on the YouTube channel, because hair and makeup, it's exhausting. And so I knew that I could just sit around with my microphone and do my thing, and also get to connect with new people. A lot of the people that we have on the podcast aren't authors, and but they have this voice, and they're just normal people sharing their experience of something that they struggled with, overcame, and they're actually great teachers. So I wanted to connect the regular person to the other regular person, just talk about the challenges that we have in keto and overcoming that together. So that's kind of why I started as well.
So you guys know my mission. If you heard my presentation, it's all about talking. We speak about the performance benefits of keto and how a lot of the stuff is, okay, what what do I think people are interested in hearing? And then a lot of it is a little bit selfish. I'm like, who can we bring on to answer these questions that I have? And it ends up being that a lot of the time other people are interested in it, so they listen. Not always. And sometimes people will reach out to us on the episodes that we didn't even have any idea, and it resonates with them. So for us, it's just trying to, number one, cover a subject that we think is still in its infancy, which is keto with all types of athletics. But number two, it's Brian and I both have a really hard time dealing with, assumptions and things that people just assume to be true, and so we'll just fly in the face of that, and we'll find who can we bring on to challenge that. So that's the motivation for me.
So I used to do a podcast with Jonathan Baylor many years back, and then we stopped, and I really missed it, and I had a lot of people said, we miss you, and we miss hearing chocolate in English, and
Butter.
and butter, and so people continue pinging me. And they were like, you need to do your own, you need to do your own, you need to do your own. But I'm much better as a sidekick. And then so Brian emailed me and said, I'm doing this kitchen thing, and be my sidekick. And I was like, yay.
Right. Yeah. So I kind of hinted at why I started mine. It was because you should not be reading a blog while you're driving. If you read your blogs while you're driving, then you need to stop. And you can't do it so I was thinking, I'm doing the dishes and I'm listening to something. I listen to a book. So why don't I put a podcast so someone who's doing the dishes can be listening to it, or when they're driving, or when they're working out, because I just want people to have no excuse as to why they can't get the information. There's no reason why they can't get the information. Then I started doing some videos, which, thank you, Leanne, for pointing that out, because holy crap, they suck. And I mean, just the process, the hair and makeup alone, right, it's just ridiculous. But the videos are just a whole different animal, and it's so much easier to do a podcast. I know it's weird to say that. If you've ever tried it, it's not easy, but it's easier than putting videos together. So I wanted to give another medium so that. And a lot of it's like Danny said, I had questions, so I'm like, who's a good person to talk to? These are the 5 questions I want him to answer. Maybe someone else cares about it too. I don't know, but I'm going to find out.
And of course, I've been doing this for so long, I almost forget why I started the podcast. But I think for me, it was my own self journey. People say, oh, thank you for doing the podcast. I've learned so much. I'm like, great. Didn't do it for you. Did it for me. And so I ask the questions that I want to know about and that I care about. And that's the secret, I think, because when you have that passion, you have those own questions within you that make you curious, you want to ask those questions. Okay, if somebody benefits, that's awesome. And if you've benefited in here listening to any of my podcasts or anybody up here's podcasts, be thankful that we care about it, because that's why we ask the question. And I will tell you this, the longer I've done this, the more I think about you guys. I was telling my business partner, Melanie, last night about this, that every time I'm interviewing someone on the Living La Vida Low Carb show, I'm thinking, what does John from Spokane, Washington need to hear? Is there a John from Spokane, Washington?
Come on down.
Come on down, you're the winner. So, and it's what drives me to keep doing podcasts. I do 5 a week now. So 3 on Living La Vida, Monday through Wednesday, Keto Talk on Thursday, Fasting Talk on Friday, and I'm almost possessed to start another one real soon, so stay tuned. But that's the thing, you get so passionate about it. Once you do it and you get the bug, you kind of want to do it some more. And I started off Living La Vida once a week. Do all of you guys have 1 a week on yours? It's coming. They're going to do more than 1 a week, if you can fit the time in, if you can able to quit your full-time job and do more than that. But it's difficult, but it's fun.
So I just want to append that, because Jimmy brought up something that's interesting.
For once.
Right, well, for once at that moment. He says other interesting things. But I started Ketovangelist, and that was my answer. But for the kitchen stuff, it's because people kept asking me about food. And I wanted, my answer is, eat salami or eat some beef and leave me alone. That's it. So I'm like, Carrie's a genius. Maybe I'll get lucky and fool her long enough to where she'll say yes. And she did. And that's why. Now, the other thing is, keto people tend to go through these cycles where you start and you become keto and you get dedicated and all of a sudden you have energy, and people were constantly emailing me and constantly contacting me. I want to work out, but I don't know what to do. So I started, all right, let's start an athlete thing. Let's help people get that way. And then Danny contacted me at the same time, like it was fortuitous, beyond belief. He's like, by the way, this is my Danny impression. By the way, I could totally lift a car, and I hate potatoes, bro. So I was like, I have got to be your partner. So I started with Carrie because she's a genius with food. I started with Danny because look at Danny. There we go, that's it.
So we're going to take questions here in a minute, but we're going to ask one more question of the panel, and Allie, we'll start with you again. Everybody has their own style, because sometimes people come up to me, why should I start a new podcast? You do a great job. And again, waiting list, 500 people, yada, yada. But everybody has their own voice. So can you tell us what your voice is? What is the mission that you try to communicate whenever you do a podcast, and how do you do it?
So my voice is hopefully a more human, approachable connection to functional integrative medicine. So, I kind of tease with, I use the word polysyllabic because people often say, oh, you talk like a high-powered hose of information. But I like to throw a lot of big, geeky science terms out, but then I like to take it back and connect the dots and bring in application of the information that I'm speaking to. And thank you.
I'm a fan. You guys are fans too, but she does a fantastic job.
Thank you. So I guess my voice is geeky science meets female human person. I don't know.
My voice is really of the people. Some may not know that with the Keto Diet podcast, most all the questions are not my own. I have a private Facebook group, and they decide who's going to be on the show, what we're talking about, and what questions we're going to ask of them. And I just think it's a great way of connecting a bunch of people to somebody that they may not even know they need to talk to or talk with, but I just ask all the questions of the people. Sometimes I slide in there and try to challenge our guests to kind of think outside the box or go outside the box. And it's really just to connect my community and the ketogenic community overall with these people that they wouldn't otherwise even maybe have a conversation with, and asking those challenging questions. So we just panel our private Facebook group every week and say, we're talking about blah, 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 what do you want to know? And then we pull together all the questions, and I try to get down every single one so that people can get the stuff that they need.
Yeah, my goal is to make this as accessible as possible for people. Like, I had a professor who taught cardiopulmonary pathologies, and just the way his style was, he was like just so cool, and he was taking terms and he was kind of making it easier for us to understand. So one thing that I try to do, and one thing that Brian does, that we've gotten reviews that they don't like it, and not everybody is a genius. Not everybody knows the science, and so I'll say muscle growth instead of hypertrophy a lot of the time, because some people don't know what hypertrophy is. And sometimes, someone will say something interesting, and it might be some high-level science, and Brian will just say, hey, can you repeat that again? Or, Brian will clarify that. And I think that's because we assume, especially those of us who have done this for a while, who have a science background, that everybody understands what we're talking about. And my goal is just to try to make it as accessible as possible, because going back to what you said, we don't want any barriers. We don't want people to think this is too complicated or anything like that. So that's what I'm trying to do.
So I believe that everybody can be a rock star in the kitchen. And so one of my goals is to help to teach people how to cook and to give them the confidence and to break things down into easy steps so they will go and try new things in the kitchen. For example, we did a podcast on tarragon, and I've had so many people email me and say, I've never had tarragon before, and tarragon is awesome! and leeks. I'm converting America to leeks. And again, I've had a lot of people who are now leek lovers who weren't. And lettuce. People were so amazed that we could talk about lettuce for an hour and how awesome that episode was.
Just not blood pudding.
Not blood pudding. No, we haven't done that yet, but that's a good idea. So we want to help. Well, Brian pushes buttons and slides things, and I just want to empower and help people to understand and know and learn how they can make keto delicious, because you're not going to stick, it's going to be very hard for most people to stick to keto if the food is complicated or it tastes bad, or, so my goal is to help all of you be keto rock stars in the kitchen, producing fantastically delicious food quickly and simply, and trying new stuff.
So if we're asking about voices, my voice is just the dork who has questions. I mean, I had someone recently, just like a few minutes ago, say, I love the fact that on your podcast, you stumble for words and you can't remember what you were trying to ask. I'm like, really? Because I kind of don't like that. But she's like, no, don't edit that out. I'm like, I really think, no, leave that. But that's, I mean, I have questions, and the thing is, I have a list of questions, but when I'm talking to someone, I will follow the rabbit trails every time. Allie's been on my podcast, and there were things that we wanted to talk about we never even got close to. And the thing is, she's game too. Like, I love having guests that are game. Like Jimmy was on the podcast too. Like, he was like, talk about whatever, and we would go in any direction. And that's one of the reasons Danny and Carrie and I get along so well, because we'll go whatever. It's just because that's how natural conversations flow. So I like that, and what I would rather see that or hear that than something that sounds stilted or artificial. As authentic is the right word, right?
Well, and here's the thing. If you're not able to extemporaneously talk about stuff, I didn't prepare for these panels today. We're just talking. And if you can't talk extemporaneously, why are you podcasting? And it's so funny because sometimes I'll have guests on the Living La Vida write me, what are you going to ask me? Heck if I know. I have no idea. My first question always, who knows my first question always? How'd you get in the medical profession? How'd you start podcasting? Why did you start cooking? What's your story about fitness? It's always about who they are first. And then I'll hear something in there and go, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Let's go down that rabbit trail, as you said. And so those come across so much better. And no, I do not cut anything out of any podcast. There's nothing worse than listening to just such a slick podcast. You're just like, all right, where's the real world in there? I had one time a paleo person on, Sarah Fragoso was on. Who knows Sarah? Both of you, great. So Sarah had a little boy at the time, and the little boy, in the middle of our interview, she's sitting there waxing eloquently about her book, and her little boy walks in and goes, Mommy, I gotta go pee! Did Jimmy Moore remove that? No, that's podcast gold. So I think that's real world, people relate to that, and that's kind of how I've tried to make my philosophy is, again, no fakery, authentic. And if we mess up and I do that on Keto Talk all the time. So it's real world, and it's what makes podcasting fun, because you don't have to be anybody except that 100% 24/7 in your head guy or girl. So we have some questions. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name's Cindy. How you just ended is a perfect segue to my question, because my question is of a technical nature. What do you do post-production? Are you guys using any particular software? Tell us about that.
I said to Leanne before this, I was like, I hope they don't ask any technical stuff because my husband isn't here. And I literally I was like, it's a microphone with like a thing around it. And so pass. I just talk. He does all this stuff. There's some dashboardy stuff with some stuff. And I'm sorry. Pass.
Yeah. And I agreed with Allie because I hired somebody for that. So, I mean, I edit my own videos. I do basically everything else. But when it comes to editing the podcast, I remember the first podcast was scheduled for someday, and I was trying to find a microphone and the thing that goes over top of the microphone. So I don't even know what it is. It's like I made it out of a crochet circle and a nylon sock that was used because I didn't have time to go out and get one. And I remember looking at the requirements of like uploading it, and then there was something to do with Libsyn and putting some RSS thing somewhere, and I was like, I could figure this out, and I know how to do Photoshop and WooCommerce, and I know how to do all the things, and I was like, I just don't have time. So I hired somebody to do it, and it's great, and he's the best. And it was really inexpensive too.
Gary?
We do nothing.
We do nothing.
We join, we talk about me, lettuce, you mussels, and then we say, do your thing, Brian, we're going to play.
Yeah, I stop talking and then I wait till Wednesday and then and then I listen.
So, okay,
Well, it's left to you and me to try to figure this out for this.
right. So, re-ask your question so I make sure I answer the right way.
I'm curious about what kind of software and what the post-production
Okay,
is.
so I'm going to get a little technical on you. I record with the PR40 mic that is just purchased, and I use a Mackie 1402 soundboard. I record everything from the computer through some Behringer USB to right and left channels into the soundboard, and I record everything into a sound recorder that has a card, a 32 gig card. Take the card out, put it in my computer, and I use Adobe Audition to do all the sound editing. And I upload it to Simplecast after I run it through ID3 tags to make sure that everything works correctly when people look at it on their MP3 player. And then I'll upload it to Simplecast, and then I use the Simplecast MP3 code to use that into my RSS feed. Does that help at all? No? I have a master's degree in computer science.
No kidding.
It definitely helps. When you're doing that editing...
That's the hard one. I'm going to give you the easy one.
Oh, okay.
I use this thing called Audio Hijack Pro. It's a Macintosh. Who uses Mac? Get a Mac if you're going to podcast, because it's the best one for podcasting and everything else too. But podcasting is really good on Mac. So I use Audio Hijack Pro. I use Audacity in post-production. You can also use GarageBand. It's another good one. I use a Blue...
Is GarageBand free? Because Audacity is.
Yeah, they're both free. I can use a Blue Yeti microphone, which if you like the sound of like the last 300-something episodes of Livin' La Vida and all my other shows, it's that Blue Yeti mic. And so that's what I use. And then post-production, I actually chop off the front, chop off the back, and send that audio to my producer, who then puts it on Libsyn and iTunes and all that stuff for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I tend to try to do all of my intros and outros on the recording, so I don't have to do it post. However, sometimes that doesn't go well, so I have to do them again. And luckily for the athlete podcast, I've got them pre-recorded, so I can just slap them on. But for the kitchen podcast, I have to do the outros live. For the Ketovangelist, I do both intro and outro live. So if they screw up, I got to do them all over again, and just edit out all of the profanity that our guests use.
And then the only other thing I do post-production is I do the coming up next time on the Livin' La Vida Low Carb Show, Brian Williamson. Yeah, and that kind of thing. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to apologize right off because I don't have a question. But I have to say, this is something that I've never said in public before. And Brian and Carrie, you have inspired me today. Because I have suffered with depression as long as I can remember. I just got a diagnosis about 25 years ago now. And Danny, I've been lifting since I was 16. And today I came to the realization that I've used my depression as the excuse to quit things. Quit a diet, quit a lifestyle change, quit lifting. something I enjoy the hell out of. I like lifting more than the guy next to me. My wife tells me it's not a competition, but it is. And so I just wanted to tell you folks that you really inspired me today to stop finding an excuse to be a quitter and to go forward.
And this is why we podcast, guys. This right here. See, that never gets old.
Yeah.
That never gets old. Next question.
I agree that all of you up there have inspired so many people in different ways. I actually have a quick question and then a longer question. First question is for Brian and Danny, and that is, are you competing in an obnoxious orange shoe contest right now?
Yes, they are.
Okay, all right. Who thinks mine are more obnoxious? Who thinks Danny's are more obnoxious?
I've been accused of being subdued and
He sent me a picture of him like a week ago.
Yeah.
He goes, check it out. I went conservative.
So my wife is always like, when I order these things online, she's like, "Oh my gosh, those are ugly," and then she sees them in person, and I'm like,
Those
fresh
are
to
fresh.
death.
They're
Which,
Fresh to death.
which Oompa Loompa did you steal it from?
All right, but my actual podcasting question is, when you guys do interview guests, are they Skyping in with you, or what method are you using to actually interview them since they're not in a studio with you?
Skype for me.
Skype.
Yeah, Skype. And then I use Easy Recorder to record it.
Usually Skype or Google Hangouts. Yeah.
Google Hangouts.
Skype or Google Hangouts. I'm looking into Zoom because it seems to be it seems to be way more stable. Skype is going nuts lately. Google Hangouts is great, but they're about to change the whole entire infrastructure, and I'm not convinced the API is going to be stable, but I could be wrong because Google, whatever. But Zoom is supposed to be pretty stable. I'm going to start checking it out. But Zoom is you have to pay for.
And one of the challenges of Skype, and I just had this on one of my podcasts, there was a 3-second delay. You know how hard it is to ask a question, and then it's like, and then they come on, and then you're trying to anticipate when they're going to end because you know there's a 3-second delay, and then it sounds like you're talking over them, and so I sound like I'm rude, and I get 5,000 emails from people saying, you're the rudest host I've ever heard on podcast, and so, yeah.
No, and even if you wait, trying to edit it afterwards just sounds even more
impossible.
awkward.
And you want to cut your video from Skype because that'll slow it down further, just to mention that in case they're...
Although I will say there's a disadvantage to that because Danny typically records without his shirt on. So my wife will be walking by like, "Oh, you're recording a podcast."
Y'all should do a live podcast with video sometime.
Don't encourage him.
It'll just be Danny sitting there.
I'm pretty sure people would still watch it. All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, I have my shirt on when I podcast.
If you could tell the teen version of yourself one thing about nutrition and fitness, what would it be?
Oh, that I know that voice. I know that voice. That is my nephew Jake. He wants to know. The question is, if you could tell your teen self, the teen version of yourself, what would your nutrition advice be?
Yes.
Okay.
I would tell my teen version of myself 2 things. One is that calories don't count. I was in that mindset of like, and also fat within that. That counts as still my first one because I would, look at something like Swedish fish and be like, they're fat-free though. So calories and fat don't count. And then the second one would be to make peace with animal consumption. Being an omnivore.
Yeah, I love it. So I would tell my teenage self I dealt with a lot of eating disorder stuff, and that was probably my worst point of my life as a teenager. So I would give her a hug, tell her to eat, with friends and loved ones and appreciate her body, because this body is the only thing that she's going to be able to experience the world in. So those are the two things that I would say.
Yeah, I would like round up Ray Vega and Danny Vega, the team, the two people who thought that every day after football practice you needed double Whoppers with, or double quarter pounders with McFlurries to get bigger, because it's obviously not the best thing. So yeah, that's what I would do. Just eat real food, and there's a healthier way to put on muscle.
So if you heard my talk this morning, you can probably guess what I'm going to say. I would get tested for MTHFR. Absolutely. My life would have been completely different if I'd have had that test when I was a teenager. And the other thing I would say, which is not nutrition or exercise, but it would be, there is no more shame in having a mental health issue than there is having any other illness. And just don't listen to that.
My teenage self, I would pretty much say, fight a little harder to keep your brother from eating your food. But I would also basically just say, admit you're a sugar addict and that it's poison and it's killing you. That's it.
I tell them to find the flux capacitor and go back in time. No, seriously, I think we all grew up with what we knew. And what we knew is what our parents taught us. And what our parents taught us probably wasn't really smart. So if I had the chance, I would talk to my mom. And I would say, hey, look, you've got bad genetics. It's all good. But let's not make them worse. Let's start feeding those kids real food. And if they stick to real food, a lot of these issues they're going to deal with down the road won't manifest. And so I wish I had learned the real food message a lot earlier in my life. Next question.
I have two things. I hope I remember them both. I can't believe I almost missed this opportunity. I've been a podcast junkie since probably 2010, 2011, when I found Jimmy. So I drive to work every day for an hour, and that's...
I'm sorry.
One of my issues is sometimes the podcast is so low, I can't get it high enough. People can turn the podcast down.
You mean the volume
The
is too low?
volume.
Okay.
I cannot get the volume high enough. And one day, something very important was going on, and I put my finger to my ear and I closed my eyes. And the car in front of me stopped.
Oh, no.
I was able to stop quick enough, but when I realized what I'd done, it scared me. So I'm just saying it needs to be, many of them need to be higher for us driving in cars. I'm in 35 in DFW, so you know the construction going on, so we need that. And the other thing is, I know a lot of us listen when we go to bed. How many times have you stopped a podcast because you heard a door open? There's a door open or some squeaking in the background, and you think it's in your house, but it's in the podcast. I'm just saying, I've experienced that a couple of times. It's kind of funny when you're listening. But the biggest thing is the volume. If that's an issue, is there a certain level you try to get it at, or?
So that's a post-production thing that should be handled. Audacity does give you that ability to boost it post-production. I can tell you my producer has done some magic sometimes. I'm very loud when I talk, but not all of my guests are. And so if there's this huge disparity, he'll go in post-production on that guest and raise them up all the way so that you don't have that issue. As far as noise in the background, I've been getting a lot of those kind of complaints lately. I recently moved into a brand new podcast recording studio, and I haven't gotten soundproofing on the walls yet. So people are like, it's really echoey on your podcast lately. I'm like, yeah, get over it, because I'm working on that.
It's
And
just
that's ambiance.
Right, and what scared me a couple times was just I was home alone and I hear this crack, a door open. I'm like, oh, what's that?
Or you hear a cat in the background meowing. That was one reason I wanted a recording studio, because
Thank you for all that you do and for all that you brought us all here. Appreciate
So
it
just
so much.
to answer your question too, yes, there is a level that I try to bring it to. I try to get it to negative 16 lush. That's what I try to get it to.
Okay. Whatever that is. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey guys, I was just wondering how you link your podcast and how that I would be using it to build my audience, and if you guys had something else to kind of direct your audience to first, or how the podcast plays into the big puzzle of, do you have a Facebook following, do you have a website, do you have a blog, and how does your podcast work into building that audience or synergy? Because I don't have a blog right now, but if I wanted to start a podcast first, how would I go about building that?
So I may not have the best promotion skills because first and foremost, I'm a clinician, and then I just kind of, like I said, show up and talk for my podcast. But we upload through Podbean, which pushes it into iTunes. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do, but that's what we do. And then we shoot over the URL once it's been posted, I guess, or uploaded to, I do have a website team, and then we have a page. I have podcast as a top nav of my website. And so on the podcast page, then each episode has a stylized graphic, and then when you click on that, there'll be a little bit of show notes with some hyperlinks of things that we've discussed. So if I've discussed a lab or a nutritional compound or a recipe, those links we put in the show notes. And we right now just do a really simple, like I use Typograph or Canva, just different imaging technology, where we'll do like a branded logoed image when we upload the podcast on Instagram and Facebook.
So all that's done before you upload the podcast?
Well, the podcast is uploaded right when it hits Podbean, right when it's uploaded, it goes live to iTunes. And so I don't get it on my website until about 48 hours after. That's because I send it out to a third party once it's live with that URL, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But we right away within a couple hours, usually when I'm putting my daughter down is when I'm making my typography image. Is that terrible? But it's true, it happens sometimes. So, when she's kind of lulling, I'm like, dee, 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 dee. And then that's, it had just gone up within that hour or so.
Okay, cool.
So from a business revenue generation, traffic generation perspective, on the podcast, my intro in the podcast encourages people to get a free meal plan so they can kind of see what I'm about, what sorts of things our community is eating, and then we do an announcement section in the podcast where I can share, like, I'm on tour right now, come join me here or there or everywhere, these are the new things that are happening, and that's kind of how we use the podcast to share new ideas and new things that are coming out. And then the process is, after we record it, it goes for production and things like that. We actually schedule it through Libsyn, and that's why we didn't choose, I think, Podbean and a couple of others, because once you put it out there, it's out there, whereas with Libsyn, we can schedule it. So as soon as it's out there and with my editor and being edited, I work on all the images for social media and newsletter, and we've actually started using the newsletter as our Sunday push for products and other things. Usually, because of our community manager, she comes up with a list of questions that people have, and that usually becomes our Sunday newsletter. So everyone on our newsletter list gets a Sunday newsletter, plus the podcast, plus answers to common questions that happen that week. So instead of just being a podcast, because some people just aren't into podcasting, and when they get this newsletter, they're like, thanks for another podcast, we've tried to make it more holistic, where they're getting their their questions answered. Their answers question, that too. And so it's just a holistic way, and then we promote it on social media, through our newsletter, and through other channels like our YouTube channel. But I've never really looked at the podcast as a way to generate followers. There just wasn't enough space on YouTube to answer the questions that were coming in. So maybe that's not the right way, but it's the way I do it.
You're going to sense a theme here.
We do nothing.
We do nothing. I record. I stop. So Brian has the email list. We have Facebook groups. The Facebook groups there will always be an announcement of the podcast, so that'll be a post. For me, I put it on all my social media because some people may be following me because they really like the pictures of all the recipes I used to do, and now I guess they're stuck with pictures of meat. But they'll see this week we talked about this subject, and some of those people don't know about the podcast, so that's kind of how they hear about it, Instagram or Facebook. But definitely what I'm learning from talking to other people who know what they're doing is leverage the largest following that you have on whatever social media, and then try to pull those people into the other social media and use different things, like use the podcast, use the YouTube to draw followers to Instagram. That's just what I'm seeing people do.
So when we started the kitchen, it was tagged on to the main Ketovangelist podcast, which already had a huge following. So, and then after about 3 months, we made it its own thing, and I think most of those people started listening to that. So that was how we got it started. But then Brian does whatever techie stuff he does, and then we post it in our Facebook groups, on the website, and all of the social media.
Can you ask that question one more time so I make sure I answer it correctly?
Yeah. How do you leverage, like, where did the podcast fit in to what you were already doing, like your brand?
So, from a marketing perspective, what we do is content marketing. And the only thing a podcast is different than a blog is just, it's a different media. So we're doing content marketing for something. And originally, I started Ketovangelist podcast. I wanted to just build an email list so I could directly communicate with people when I needed them to know something. So the intro to the Ketovangelist podcast says, in exchange for your email address, you'll receive one shiny brand new ebook full of all the foods that you can eat and still stay ketogenic. So they get a food list. And all they do is go put their email in. And by the way, don't email me for that list, because you're not going to get it if you email me. They go in and add their email, and that was it. So building that email list is really what was key. Once it's ginormous, by the way, once it's ginormous, you're paying a ginormous monthly fee to keep that list of email. Holy crap. But then you use that to directly market for whatever. Using social media, I have stuff set up. Well, I have. The ineffable Rekha J, yes, that Rekha J, has set up an eClincher, which is a social media management platform, to listen to the RSS feeds for the podcast. So anytime a new one comes up, I do all the graphics myself, which that's why they're so simple. Although the new stuff on the athlete is fantastic, because Rekha J's husband did some bang up like artwork for stuff, and we're going to be doing some new artwork for ours. But I do all the artwork, and then I have it set up as an RSS feed. eClincher sees the RSS feed and publishes it new to all the social media that we tell it to. I hope that was actually the answer to your question.
Yeah.
And I started so long ago, I didn't know any better to try to use it to market. I just wanted to get the word out. I was passionate. I wanted to have a voice to get the word out there, and I had no intention of having sponsors or doing anything with it. I'll tell you, the biggest thing that podcasting has done for me is people know my voice now. I can walk into a room. It's so funny, the first time I went to the Ancestral Health Symposium, and I didn't say a word. Nobody knew what I looked like, apparently, in 2011, and all I had to do was talk. All these heads turned around and went, "You're Jimmy Moore." Whoa, that's kind of cool. And so the biggest thing that happened for me was 2012, I got offered a book contract. And now my last 4 books have been bestsellers. And I have 3 more in the next year. And so if you have aspirations, it's a good way to get your name out there if you connect with an audience and you have a voice to share.
Cool. Thank you guys. Grateful for all that you guys do.
So just to tack onto that, I started with 0 listeners. Jimmy started when there were no listeners.
Yeah.
So, and did you guys start from fresh? You had kind of a YouTube following, but when you started YouTube, it was 0 viewers, right? Okay, you had to follow. Okay. And Allie?
No, it was just to my clients.
Right.
It was a resource for my clients, a give back for free versus having to pay to come see me.
And that is really the key. Give someone something that they want to listen to, they will share it, period. And you don't have to do a lot of that work. Let them do the work for you. They're going to share it with their friends and family if it's worth their while.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Last question.
So I have a little bit of a case of analysis by paralysis often, and I'll do videos on my Facebook group and just in my pajamas, didn't put any makeup on, and a lot of people watch them and I get a lot of feedback, and then every time I go to start a podcast, I'm like, what the heck do I call it? Because keto should be in the name so I get better SEO, but there's this thing, and so I know, like, Brian, you're Ketovangelist, but then keto is in the word, and does that get the same SEO? There's a space after keto? this is what is in my head regularly.
Okay, let me stop you right there. I have never once ever thought about SEO. I don't care.
Me neither, ever.
Because listeners are the way you get more listeners.
Right.
Can you give me another reason I should hesitate for a while longer? But I'm kidding.
Let me think. No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, panel.